It's time now for Harm Reduction, heard every Tuesday at 7 a.m. with Will Beaton. Cutting Edge Radio, where we'll ask the questions others don't want to ask. Now here's your host, Will Beaton.
Wow. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Harm Reduction Report. I'm Willard T-Belly. Super excited to just break in that musical intro there. Noah, who works with the radio station KEQQ here, had that made, and it was really funny when he showed it to me. It was a surprise, and it definitely got me up and out of my seat and super excited to talk about harm reduction. So thank you, and I'm happy to be here again. So the Harm Reduction Report is a show about harm reduction. What's harm reduction? Well, it applies to a lot of public health concepts. Mainly, we've talked a lot about it in terms of substance use and substance abuse and addictions and community solutions to drug epidemics and stuff like that. And it's been a blast. This is now our 11th episode, and we've been very fortunate to get a lot of feedback from all of our people listening. It was really nice to know people are listening, so thank you again, honestly. And keep emailing the station and contacting us on our the UND Psychedelic Club Facebook page, or also the Sandbagger News YouTube channel, sandbaggernews.org. And we are happy to keep connecting because we're meeting a lot of people, and that's been very, very fortunate for that. The episode today is about stigma. So the Grand Forks Public Health Department is supporting me and my friends in the production of a video or a series of videos about stigma as it relates to a bunch of different public health issues. And it's been going really well. I've interviewed maybe 7 or 8 of my friends, and we've got maybe 5 or 7 more who I'm going to get some footage with, and we're going to be involved in this video project. I realized there's so many different kinds of stigma and lots of different ways it can be represented, and so that's been really fun. And if you feel like you have a GFunk stigma story that you would like to tell, you can always contact us and talk about sharing it either for the video project or just on the episode or something. But stigma has been really interesting thinking about that. There's a lot more stigma around than you think, and when you make a list of all the different kinds that you can encounter in a given day or a year, it's honestly a lot. You think, geez, we could probably do something to slim this down. It just takes some active thinking about it, and sometimes that's kind of hard to do. So it is what it is. But we're talking about stigma, and we'd love to talk with you about stigma. One thing I thought I'd share, I have about 10 or 12 minutes here to fill this recording. So right now it's Tuesday, January 30th. 3 nights ago, my friends came over and we recorded the episode that you will be hearing, the conversation you'll be hearing in a moment. And with what we've got, I have a few minutes to fill here, and I was wondering what I might say. And there was something that I thought, I could share this story because it's totally about stigma, and it would be a challenge for me to share it, because sharing about stigma is not easy. And so then I said, it'd be too scary. I don't want to tell that story. It'd be there's too much. I can't tell that story. But the whole point of this harm reduction report and us doing this is maybe the whole point is to it forces me, it challenges me to set the example that I feel like everyone else should have, right? Like, if I think and want more people to be comfortable sharing stories about their stigma so that our community can find more sensible solutions to problems, I have to share stories like about stigma too, and make it so that it's cool to do so. So I'd like to explain why I am turning in this episode a day late, actually. So normally the Harm Reduction Report airs it airs, I think, throughout the week, but it airs on Tuesday mornings. But it's Tuesday night right now, and I'm going to turn this in tonight, so it'll air actually tomorrow, Wednesday morning, 31st, I think. And that's because I wasn't feeling so hot yesterday. It all started out, I was walking to, I attended a friend's party. It was like a work party, and the place was closed, and there was free food and free drinks, and it was a nice time. And I walked. I had a place I was staying at Cal's apartment. Actually, I was staying at Cal's apartment that night so I didn't have to drive home. So after I left around midnight, I went to Cal's place and crashed. And for one reason or another, I guess I drank beer, but I didn't think I drank enough to get sick. However, I don't know, maybe I was reacting to the food as well. Either way, around 2:30 in the morning, I was puking up all the beer and food I had at the at the thing. Bummer, because it was all really delicious. And I was like puked 2 or 3 more times throughout the night. And come 7 a.m., I'm still like laying on Cal's couch trying to sleep. And it's the same. I was just watching Cal's dog, Sam, who we mentioned in a previous episode. Poor dog. I had to put Sam down while Cal was out while I was watching his dog because she got sick. And anyway, she was puking on this couch, and I'm laying on Sam's couch, Sam the dog's old couch, and puking myself. But I'm making it to the bathroom. However, suddenly around 7 a.m., I feel like I'm going to puke again. But I remember sitting up. And I had some kind of seizure. I had this particular experience that has happened to me before that I'm calling a whiteout. It's someone else who saw this happen to me described it as a seizure. So I'm really not sure. But it just happened, and again, it's about 30 seconds of this complete absence from my body, and when people are around me, they say I get really stiff and not exactly convulse, but stiff, and I lose control of everything. And for me, it's a really terrifying experience. It's so almost impossible to explain, but it's really scary, and it kind of fades out back into normal life, and that's when it gets scary because you're suddenly aware of what's happening, and it's like all the electrons in your electrodes in your brain are zapping at once or something, and you just get too much information. You feel trapped and you can't move, and I don't know, it's so weird. And so I'm I don't know, I guess I'm thinking this is kind of strange, but see, the reason this is related to stigma is because, okay, this week marks the 6th time that this seizure experience, this very I know it's the same feeling because it's indescribable. It happened 6 times, and the hard part about talking about this, I've talked to my parents about all of this, and it's difficult because the first 4 times the first 3 times that this experience happened, I was under the influence of a psychedelic substance. And so I was under the impression that, well, for some reason, this is how I am reacting to psychedelics right now. And so after that 3rd time, I made the decision to not do any more psychedelics because I was afraid that this strange whiteout experience would happen. And so ever since then, I hadn't done any psychedelics. And but one day it happened anyway. The whiteout experience happened again. I was in my friend's car driving, and it just happened out of the blue. I was totally sober in every aspect. That day I had a really good breakfast and lunch, and I was drinking water in the car, and I felt great, and I was having a good time, and it just came out of nowhere. And so that really stunned me. But the weird thing is when I talk to people about this, and then I tell them that, the first 3 times this happened, there were psychedelics involved. They seem to almost dismiss it sometimes. They seem to think like, oh, it's not a real seizure, or it's not something that matters. You're just stop, don't do any more psychedelics. And I'm in agreement there. I have been, but sometimes people take that even further, and and it's not sensible how we're talking about it. I feel like I can't be open about it with people and have them fully understand me. And maybe that's just my problem, actually, but I don't know. I'm noticing that it's there. For example, I just got a doctor's appointment lined up, and next week I'm going in, just like for a physical, really, and maybe some blood work and well, whatever. I haven't gone to the doctor like that in a long time, and I'm almost off my parents' health insurance, so I got to get the most of that while I can. Anyway, maybe they will know. I'm gonna tell them about this, but see, I'm worried because, I mean, half of these experiences, the first times these experiences ever happened to me, it was under influence of psychedelics. Since then, it's been once while I was sleeping, once while I was driving, and once this week while I was hungover. So it's so weird, and I can't place the common factors, really. I'm trying to find out what is the common factor between them, and I can't really do that. But I feel maybe I don't even have to mention then, that psychedelics were involved in the beginning, because as these seizure things have continued to happen, I realize it can happen without the presence of psychedelics. So perhaps it's not even worth mentioning. But the other part of me would love to tell the doctor that the first few times this happened, it was while I was doing this. I mean, the doctor might know, even if really the problem is still going to happen whether I'm on psychedelics or not. Our doctor might know something about why it might happen. Maybe it would help explain this. I don't know. It's weird. I feel like it's something that I'm never really going to understand. Seizures, I mean, I feel like that's a really broad word that describes a lot of things. And for many, many reasons, a person could have a seizure. It just, every time this happens, it's so freaky, fading back in sort of to being there. This one was the worst because the other times it happened, I was with people. I was within arm's reach of someone. But this time it happened, I was in a room alone on the couch my friend's dog just died on. And puking on the same floor the dog did. When I faded in this time, the first feeling I remembered having was the feeling of something wet on my arm, and realizing that I puked all over myself, and that I must have puked in the midst of that whiteout moment. And if I hadn't been laying on my side or just then scooching up to get up, I might have puked laying flat on my back, and something bad might have happened. So it's weird, and I guess it feels nice to talk about it. I've talked with my parents about it and with my friends and stuff. I don't know. Hopefully, it'll be nice talking to a doctor about it. But yeah, you see, I am nervous a little bit. Just sheer fact that I'm gonna want to talk about psychedelic use with my doctor, and I don't know what kind of doctor I'm gonna get. You'd think a really good doctor would not let this, any kind of stigma associated with that even the doctor has in his or her personal life or something, would not influence any judgments as to what we ought to do about what's going on. I am kind of assuming most of these sorts of people won't know very much about the actual chemicals that I was under the influence of these first 3 times this thing happened. And so maybe there's going to be some ignorance involved. I won't blame them for not knowing about all the chemicals. I know a bit, what I can know. But I'm no doctor. But I'm nervous because I've talked to some people about it, and they made me honestly just feel bad about it. Made me feel guilty. Made me feel like it was all my fault because of my deliberate choice to do psychedelics or other things. They say, make me feel ashamed. And without going into all the details yet and helping me figure out why this actually is happening and what is it? Is it a combination of being dehydrated and being tired or whatever else? I'm not sure. But anyway, thank you for letting me share that story. It's partly an apology explaining why the episode is a week or a day late. It's because I was putting the pieces of my fragile ego back together, after the other night. So, feeling great now, for the record. Cal and Victoria took care of me so great. And in the morning, I woke up on their couch after all that. I knocked on their door after I had the seizure, and they came out and hung out with me and took care of me. And then Victoria's kids came out. They're 2 and 5, and they hung out with us. So we're all piled up on the couch, and it was actually a great way to wake up. And I was honored just to be in the presence of good friends who would take care of me no matter what's going on. So anyway, our episode today is about stigma. We're going to cut into the conversation we recorded the other night with the gang, talking about stigma. And listen to the intro music. I think it's pretty good this week. It could do better. Thank you so much, and Sandbagger on.
It's your weekly harm reduction club. Harm reduction club.
Wow.
Nice.
Thank you all for being here. This is the Harm Reduction Report. I'm Willard T-Belly, sitting with my dearest Sandbagger homies.
Your pal Cal.
And you know me, it's Timmy D.
No, nice one.
Yeah. As always, Mad Max in the house.
In the basement,
Oh,
to be
yeah.
specific.
Yes, it's true.
Basement
In
of the house.
my parents' basement with the Sandbagger banner hanging right there behind you on the couch again. I
Yep.
must remind you, I was once a baby upon.
It's true. We got the
Had this couch a long time.
Alan Watts isness machine chilling behind us.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, we can turn it on, but
It's too
we create
squeaky.
this horrible squeaking sound that would... Maybe we'll use it sparingly. Whenever anyone really needs it, we'll turn
Whenever
it on.
we take a break or anything, we'll turn it on, and that'll be the sound in the background.
But today's topic is stigma.
Our dear friend Michael Dulitz, who works with the City of Grand Forks Public Health Department, is helping us, working with us to make a video about stigma. So, what is stigma? It seems like, now that I've been thinking about it for a while, something that the Psychedelic Club should be interested in if their motto is to spread perspective. Because stigma prevents perspective spreading. It often keeps people in a situation where they feel they can't say something. And so they don't. I can think of lots of times where I've been afraid to say something that probably should have been said. And so the video project we're trying to make is basically a series of interviews with people we know who are from or who have lived or gone to college or something in good old GFunk.
Oh, yeah.
And get some of these stories about times where stigma was preventing the spreading of some sincere perspective that probably people needed to hear. And so our conversation tonight may basically be us going through the process of collecting some video footage and thinking about maybe each of you a stigma-related story from Grand Forks. And whenever we want, we can turn the camera on just for a few minutes for each of you. But
I'm about it.
we can chill and talk too. So what do you guys think about stigma?
I don't know. I definitely agree with you in, saying that stigma prevents people from discussing things. And I believe that it's very subjective because there are people that believe things that majority of people do not agree with. And there are things that can help promote positive social change and negative social change, and stigma either for or against whatever that may be, depending on how you look at it, could be a positive or negative thing. However, I do think that it's a positive thing for people to say what they feel needs to be said, even if it's not 100% socially acceptable, because that's how a lot of changes that we live with today have started. The women's suffrage movement, people of color, all of these things started as something that wasn't socially acceptable and is now moved towards the forefront, and it's okay.
Like, we should have a revolution and form our own country kind of talk.
Yes. If we're going that far back, I agree.
Well, yeah, that's what we're founded on, right? So, GFunk I wonder how people feel. I was really surprised when we interviewed my friend Luke. He said that he's from a small town, Minnesota, where there are a lot more stigma-related problems than here, he said. And it was really interesting for him to describe GFunk as almost a paradise where he could freely express himself, like on campus when he was a student. It's like, wow, that's not really how I would describe Grand
Yeah,
Forks.
I was gonna say it's definitely a perspective thing at that, because I don't find Grand Forks to be this super big paradise, but I feel that way about other places like Colorado, where we have another psychedelic club chapter that is a little more open for things that I believe have stigma around here, and that's something that I'm going to talk about later. Like Will said, we are going to be turning on a camera today. We're going to be recording some things for the Grand Forks Public Health Initiative that Will is making, so I'm very excited to discuss that as the night goes on.
Yeah. So I think each of you have been sort of thinking for a stigma story or two that would sort of fit with this project, and we looked at some of the other interviews briefly to get an idea of what we might do. So I think maybe Tim wants to start talking about substance testing.
Yeah, I can if you want me to.
Is that the topic you feel there's a stigma-related issue that belongs
that is the
with
topic that
this list?
I feel the most strongly about in terms of stigma-related things.
Yeah.
Because when the Psychedelic Club was first founded, one of our big initiatives was to try offer substance testing kits on campus. And our administration was completely against it. We had a Psychedelic Club member go up to a panel, and they, unfortunately, were not very receptive towards the idea. However, other chapters of the Psychedelic Club do offer substance testing kits for all people of their campus, students, grad school students. I'm sure faculty would be allowed to rent one if they so choose.
I don't know. In Boulder, they were told to stop. Now.
Were they?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
No more substance testing kits.
No, yeah.
Why did that come up?
Well,
Because I know as of last year they were.
I think even then, I don't think it was for very long they were actually doing it.
Really?
Before they were eventually told to stop doing it.
Okay.
But we've talked about them doing it before. That's because it was really cool that they did, because while they were doing that, they were collecting data to show that, at least of the people who use their testing kits on CU Boulder's campus, more than 80% of the MDMA was not MDMA, and more than 40% of the LSD was not LSD, at least from what their kits said.
Okay.
Yeah, they wouldn't have been able to present those statistics
Right.
without those substance testing kits.
They can't collect that data anymore, in the same way
Yeah.
that we couldn't.
I'm very curious if those substance testing kits saved lives in doing that, if people didn't take something that they were originally going to ingest. And that's one of the main reasons I'm for substance testing kits. Being readily available is for safety. There are people that are going to take substances, whether you tell them to or not. You can tell people that methamphetamine is bad for you. There's still going to be people that are going to take it regardless of what you say. And I think that these kits can offer at least some type of identification, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not 100% right all of the time. It can be contaminated. It doesn't tell you strength, but I believe that it's better than nothing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of the stigma lies, is there are people that believe that if these kits are offered, that people will be taking more and more substances.
Yeah, almost like it condones, it enables the use of drugs.
Yes. But I had sat down, when we first started the club, I had sat down with a local attorney who was registered in North Dakota and Minnesota, and asked him about the legality of these testing kits, because our administration was so against it, right? And our administration, like I said, was very against it. They thought that it would promote drug use, so I went to him to find out the legality of how this works, and it turns out to be at the time, I haven't talked to him since, but it turns out to be a fairly gray area where it could be considered some type of drug paraphernalia if an illegal substance was put inside of it. Which is very interesting to me because there was a documentary that really turned me on to these substance testing kits. It was called What's in My Baggie. And it was these guys from a company called the Bunk Police. And what the Bunk Police do is they make these kits. And they went all around to different festivals in the United States. And they had talked with people and said, hey, can we test your drugs? You know, I see you have something. Can I see what it is? Can I test it? And I'll just tell you, give it back to you. We're not police, anything like that. And majority of people had bath salts. And according to this documentary, they claimed that they were on the up and up with law enforcement. That law enforcement didn't have any problems with what they were doing. They set up little tents and they said, all right, who wants, testing kits? We're going to see what you have. We're going to tell you. We're going to log the results and, something may come of it in terms of research or, whatever it may be. So I found it very interesting that happened. And they said it was okay, and it turns out here it's pretty much a gray area. And maybe that's a difference of, state laws, local laws, and things like that. But I think that doing that is for the best. There are places like the Boom Festival that have legitimate labs where you can drop off your drugs, and they'll give you a little ticket number. You come back in a while, and they will have a full analysis of this drug and tell you exactly what it is.
Yeah, that's ideal. And then, from that you can extrapolate, what are the drug interactions, potential drug interactions and stuff like that, as stigma decreases around things like this, There's just more and more beneficial policy to reduce harm for people.
Yeah, and I am afraid that the stigma that is preventing us from having drug testing kits on our campus might be the same stigma that prevents people from having access to a legitimate lab to test their substances if they so choose.
When did you first hear about substance testing kits?
I guess
from that documentary?
It started from the documentary, and it was very loose. I just saw it on Reddit, actually, on the r/drugs subreddit. I thought it was, at the time, very entertaining. I was a freshman or sophomore in college, and I just thought it was a very entertaining place to look at what people are ingesting and how it affects them and long-term effects, because there are people that discuss their addictions, they discuss stories of when they were on a substance, they discuss people that are close to them that have had problems with substances. It seems to be a very large smorgasbord of everything that drugs entail. The highs, the lows, the problems, the sadness, everything.
It's just like information in general.
Exactly. Some people definitely don't know what they're talking about. Some people seem to know what they're talking about. Some people have been around the block more than a few times with that kind of stuff. But they linked this documentary, and it was so interesting the way they prefaced it in the comments. I had to watch it. So I sat down, blocked out the next hour of my life, and watched it. And it was really interesting, seeing the reactions of people who had bought thousands of dollars of what they thought was MDMA, and it turns out to be bath salts.
I saw that, yeah. They decided not to take it.
Yeah.
They were like, we're not taking bath salts.
And
I think that's like the golden point right there.
Yes.
It's like what people need to know is that testing kits like this, in my opinion, isn't going to make people want to do more drugs or do drugs. But the people that are currently doing drugs or want to do them, whether they just want to go to a party or are addicted or anything, if they start finding out that a lot of their substances they're acquiring are not what they say they are, maybe that's kind of like the push to get them to stop doing some destructive behaviors, so to speak. But
it would be great to get that data behind the hypothesis that places that allow the administration of substance testing kits does not increase the instance of drug use. Mm-hmm. But we can't get that data until we address stigma and sort of, influence the change, the tide of the stigma here.
Yeah, right now all we really have in terms of data that I found is Ecstasy Data website has their statistics on what people send in of what they think it is and what it turns out to be. And they have it documented by year of, how many pills they've tested and what percent of people thought it was MDMA and what it turned out to be, or people who thought it was whatever drug it may be. And I find that data extremely interesting. But going back to your point, Max, that it might stop people from destructive behavior, I do agree with you, and I think that's true. But I want to go back to the What's in My Baggie documentary really quick, because there is a portion in it where a dealer gets his substance tested, and it turns out to be bath salts, and he says on camera, he's like, wow, well, victim of the system, I guess, and goes off and just sells it to someone else claiming it's MDMA. So do I think this is going to be a foolproof solution? Absolutely not. Do I think people are going to exploit the system? Most likely, in any way that they can.
But these substance testing kits, they're not for the benefit, that kind of shows they're not for the benefit of the dealers or it's kind of the higher up people. It's more benefit of people that are using.
Yeah.
Or the people that aren't involved in like selling any drugs most of the time. It's mainly consumers.
I've seen people at festivals. I travel to a few festivals a year, and I've seen people at festivals who've had their things tested from people around me who've brought their own substance testing kits. And there was one guy who's actually going around to campsites and asking if anyone had a testing kit because he just bought something, which I thought was really amazing.
Smart.
Very smart. I was amazed at the stigma that wasn't there. And a festival's a little different. I feel festivals are a lot more open towards drug use. But I was very intrigued that he was confident enough and he felt safe enough to just go around to people and ask, hey, do you have a testing kit? I want to make sure what this is legitimate. I believe it was a tab of LSD is what he wanted to test, or what he thought it was. And I don't know what it turned out to be. I just said, no, I didn't have one. And he went off. But
yeah. And, I think part of this relates to the stigma around things too, is I think when people around here especially hear of a high school student or someone overdosing on, around here the buzzword is fentanyl. Most people, I think, that don't really know a lot of the information around it believe people are purposely taking fentanyl or any of these really hard drugs, I guess. And I guess what I'm trying to say is most of the time, like a lot of the time actually, it's more of a case of someone took something they thought was something else.
Yeah.
So let's say someone took LSD, or they thought they were taking some LSD, and it turns out that nowadays dealers are putting fentanyl in all kinds of their products, so to speak. I'll call it that. I have a theory behind that, I guess. I feel like a lot of these dealers are doing this because since things like fentanyl and those really strong painkillers are so addictive to the human body, if you put a little bit of that into some of your other stuff, it makes people addicted to whatever you're giving them. But obviously there's no one weighing it out or measuring it out, so I think a lot of the overdose problems with it come from that, in which people don't even know they're taking it. Whereas if people had more wide access to testing kits or something like that, you took your tab of LSD to a location somewhere, or I don't know, preferably it'd be cool if there was like a location in town that provided it, that you could go there anonymously, like sign into it or something and have it done. And all of a sudden, if you find out a lot of what your bro's been hooking you up with is all of a sudden a bunch of stuff laced with fentanyl and stuff, probably save your life, and you might tell other people that this is happening. It could save other people's lives too.
Well, I think
It's
it needs to be said that some of the people who are dying do not know what they're ingesting.
Absolutely, yeah. And so these substance testing kits are a line of defense for the consumer, as you had pointed out.
The good thing about getting drugs from a doctor is that they're not wrong. It has label on there. It tells you exactly how strong it is, how much you should take. The doctor's supposed to tell you that.
And not only that, but a doctor is held accountable for what they prescribe you.
However, it can still be abused, and a lot of people become addicted to hard drugs that way, actually. But
something I'm kind of been thinking about, and I haven't been able to answer myself, is almost one of those, well, where do you draw the line? You know what I mean? On which kind of substances, are kind of okay, and which ones are like bad, which ones are never, kind of like that kind of question. I don't know how to explain that better. That was kind of very broad. Because this whole, I don't know, I was just thinking about this whole testing kits and ideas and people getting their stuff tested to make sure it is what it is. Is there ever a line where you know what it is, but you still shouldn't? I don't know what I'm trying to ask, actually. I tried to formulate that in a good
What if
question.
we kind of think of it in a certain context, and maybe for the video project, Tim could sort of maybe say something about the fact that we knew people growing up who died from these things, and
We did.
wondering maybe what could have been helpful to them.
Yeah.
All these harm reduction things we're talking about, some of that. Maybe
Yeah,
they
I
benefited
did
from.
go to school with a few people who overdosed. Some post high school. I think that what should have been on the forefront was real education, not scare tactics. We had someone who used to be an undercover DEA agent come and speak to our entire high school. It was in the gymnasium, and I'm never going to forget this, just because he was so adamant about it. He mentioned that he knew Heath Ledger before Heath Ledger killed himself or overdosed. I'm unsure which happened, but he knew Heath Ledger, and he had been undercover and he'd taken drugs with all of these Mexican cartel gangs and whatever it may be. Just these crazy stories. And the biggest story that I remember involving him is he asked everyone in the audience to raise their hand if they themselves or someone they knew had taken magic mushrooms. And people raised their hands. And then he asked, now how many of you or the person you knew threw up after you ingested those mushrooms? And everyone's hand went down. And the first thing he said is, well, those mushrooms weren't real. They were fake mushrooms, because real mushrooms, you throw up after you ingest them. No matter what quantity you throw up. And after he said that, everything just kind of went to scare tactics. He didn't talk much about the actual things that happen to your body while you ingest these substances. It was, well, marijuana burns 5 times hotter than tobacco, and it has this many carcinogens, and methamphetamine, keeps you up for 2 weeks straight. And some of the claims that he made were legitimate. Some of them were very sensationalist. And it's been so long now that I don't remember all of them, of course. But I found it very interesting. I wish there were a different way to speak to the students about this, because I adamantly remember everyone walking out of that gymnasium and just making fun of him, saying like, wow, what a crackpot. Why couldn't you have told us real information? Why did you have to make it so scary? Because at that point, people are junior, senior in high school. Most people have at least tried to smoke pot, and whether they succeeded or not.
I would also say that a lot of people, whether or not they've smoked, for example, we'll use that. They like whether or not they've smoked, at that point they have the reasoning skills, or at least the overall knowledge to be able to know that some of these claims they were making were pretty outlandish. I was there too.
Were you?
Yeah.
Okay.
He also told a story about something about cocaine, that if you put it on or lick your hand and put it on there, and if it's cool or something, it's real, or I don't remember exactly. Like I said, it was pretty, kind of like what you were saying, it was pretty blurry.
It was very sensationalist. I remember that.
Yeah, there's
very
a lot
much
of...
so. So I wish that with all of the claims that he was making and how serious he took it very seriously, whether the students heard what he was trying to say or not, he definitely took it very seriously. And I wish there was a different way to talk to the students about it, because, like I said, people were just making fun of him at the end of it, and they were mocking him. And a few people were like, "Well, he made a decent claim here and there," but for the most part, everyone was just saying, "Wow, like how sensationalist, how scare tactic." Because at that point, everyone had gone through the DARE program. Most people had, known that the things that we've been told by the school resource officer were debunked or were fake or were very sensationalist. And I think that if we had the real drug conversation at the forefront of what was going on, it might have helped. Because there were people that overdosed, like I had claimed when I was in high school, but there were also people that had very significant drug problems that weren't really talked about. the addictions portion of drugs wasn't really talked about. It was drugs are bad, and this is what they do to you, and that was it. I never really saw a resource to turn to if you had an addiction problem in high school. And even in college, I don't see a lot of it. It's don't take drugs because you're going to die at some point, and that's kind of where it stops. And I really hope that that changes. I'm not sure how to get that to change. My college professor, Frank White, he travels to different elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools and discusses drugs with them and tries to relate to them as much as possible. The big one right now that he was traveling and talking about last semester with was codeine, promethazine, cough syrup, because that seems to be an increasingly growing problem from what he was telling me, and asked me to find him relevant hip-hop lyrics from top 100 songs of these people. No.
As a hip-hop fan, it's
Yeah.
like every other song, has some kind of line with codeine sipping or
Yeah.
So
I'm leaning or something like that.
it was very interesting to know that that was the new thing. Because when I was in high school, I didn't really know much else besides marijuana was really out there. I was a pretty nerdy theater kid, but
Yeah, so are you. So was I.
but I knew a lot of people that were heavy pot smokers, and I was concerned for them. And some of it was because that I was afraid marijuana was very dangerous, and I considered them my friends. And some of that was I didn't know what else they were doing because they seemed to be some slightly rambunctious at times.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing that one of the people that I knew had passed away from a drug overdose. And I was very shocked that it actually happened, because everyone has that story. You talk to anyone, they're like, yeah, I remember this kid and he ended up passing away. And I knew him in high school and X, Y, and Z happened. He was in a car crash, or he took too much of a substance. And that was a big moment for me, and I realized that this is happening to me. I have one of those moments where I can say I knew somebody, and I grew up with the guy who passed away, elementary school, into middle school, and into high school. And it was creepy is the word that I would use to describe how everyone around me felt about it, because that was the first big moment where this had happened to anyone in our class. And people felt scared, almost, and people were quiet and very hesitant to talk about it. And there was a stigma to talk about why he had overdosed. If it was a mental health issue, or if he just took too much, or he didn't know what he was doing. And I don't know the answer to those questions, but I wouldn't want that to happen to anybody else.
So on Christmas Eve, it was probably about 2013, 2014, 2012 maybe, 2012. I lived in Bismarck, North Dakota, and I remember running around with my friends, shooting up heroin, doing meth, and that's what I did. That was my life. That's what I did with every day. Excuse me. And I remember, since it was Christmas Eve, I remember this overwhelming sensation of, I was missing the family occasion of Christmas Eve. I couldn't be there. I wasn't there. I was out running around doing meth. And I remember thinking that I had no one I could tell. Who else can you tell? Can you really tell your family members or your closest friends that, you've been doing meth? I mean, how can you turn to someone like that? There's such an enormous stigma about the topic that it's an embarrassing thing to admit. Honestly, there's embarrassment, and then there's the risk of being shunned from your friends and family. And, I mean, even my closest friends that I'd grown up with, I'd been friends with them from 5 years old all the way until I was 21, 22. I didn't feel safe telling them. And a big part of that is stigma. That's the danger of stigma. it was hard for me to pick a topic related to stigma because it's such a wide-reaching term. I mean, there's stigma related to everything. I mean, even just everything, even what we're doing here. There's a stigma related to harm reduction. There's a stigma related to psychology majors, biology majors, different religious orientations, race, and everything.
Basically, sorry to interrupt, but
No, go ahead.
basically anything that goes against the status quo.
Anything, yeah, anything. Even if it doesn't go against the status quo, it seems. But yeah, I felt like touching on this meth story because it's, you know, fresh in my mind and it's in the spirit of harm reduction here. So when I moved up here, you know, these closest friends in the story that I had mentioned growing up with from the age of 5, I moved in with them. They were so supportive in my life. I'm so grateful to have had that support network, which many people don't have. They don't have that hand up. But luckily I did. I had these friends who were like, hey, you know, you messed up, you goofed up, and you were messing around and you made some bad choices or whatever, but come up here, come to Grand Forks, move in with us, go to school, get started, get your life on track. So I moved up here. I moved up to Grand Forks. I moved in with them, and that was the greatest decision of my life. It was so good to come to Grand Forks. When I first got here, you know, I was still recovering. This was like 3 or 4 years ago even. I was still sort of in this mindset of being sort of on the outskirts of society. I still felt not quite welcome, and I think part of that was because most of my identity was tied to drugs and drug usage.
Would you say, due to the stigma, there's a fear that you would be defined by the substance, and that would be like, if you were to tell anyone or confide in anyone or seek help or whatever you wanted to do with it, it would almost, because of the stigma, you thought people would define you by your choice to...
Absolutely, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like that was most of my identity. I mean, I started using drugs when I was young. I was like 13 or 14 the first time I ever drank, and you know, then I was smoking pot a little bit later and messing around with nicotine, and I don't know. When I was young, I used to drink a ton of soda. I was like 7 years old, and I remember that was the first connection I ever made. Like, oh, I could take a substance and feel a physiological difference, a energetic difference.
Caffeine high.
Caffeine, yeah, I got caffeinated. I got a caffeine high when I was young. I remember that. So I think, you know, that's always been a huge part of my identity, was this realization that everything I take in is a drug. So I came up here, and there was still stigma in my mind towards myself. You know, I stigmatized myself in ways. As I got into school, I started gaining knowledge and seeing myself succeed in other ways. Then I was able to gain my confidence back and find myself in a different position in which my identity was no longer solely related to drugs, the stigmatized topic of drugs. Now, part of my identity is tied to many other things that are not as stigmatized, you know?
Like Addison.
Hey guys.
Howdy.
What's up? These are my friends, Max and Tim.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
And Cal.
Hello.
Nice to meet you, Addison.
I'm the soon-to-be brother-in-law.
Oh,
Yeah.
congrats. Hi there.
What's up, Ange?
Nice to meet you, Angie.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
You guys?
We both went to Red River as well.
Oh, okay.
Both their names are on all those things over there.
Aw,
They are?
cute.
Some of them.
That's adorable.
I found my
Yours
name
on.
like 3 or 4 times throughout your house, I think.
Dad did a good deed and gave 2 drunk guys a ride to a bar after
To the bar.
that.
Wow.
Here it
They were
goes.
just standing outside and like, do you have room
Made
for
20
us?
bucks off of you.
20 bucks.
Oh, nice.
Give us a ride. And I was like, okay.
That's some stigma right there.
Yeah.
Harm reduction.
yeah.
They made him walk. That's good news.
That happened to me one time. I was working for Rhombus as a delivery driver, and I was going back to Rhombus, and there's like these group of people on like, it was downtown near the warehouse apartments, and these two drunk guys just like stumbled into the middle of the road, and I like had to slam on my brakes. And they're like, bro! And I recognized them from UND, and I knew they were in one of the, I don't remember which one of the fraternities, because I used to be in SIGAP. Yeah, so they were like, hey bro, can you like totally give us a ride, man? Like $20, we'll give you $20. And they had like 8 people. And I was just like, well, it is pretty cold out. Okay.
Did you do it?
I did.
Did you make $20?
I did.
Yeah, except in my story, giving a drunk guy a ride home, I almost got punched.
What if we return to the camera
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
and think about where we were a minute ago? You told us
I have a
that
good-
story again.
Yeah, we were talking about how the substances didn't define him, and
Yeah.
the stigma kind
So-
of caused a
and,
fear to that. I
I
would say.
want you to say the word Grand Forks a couple times. And,
Grand Forks, okay.
And just to remind you to, tell something
Grand Forks,
specifically
Grand
about
Forks.
that.
Okay.
Maybe that involves a change of your perception with stigma. Think about the opportunities you had in Grand Forks
Okay, sure.
to do things or whatever. Yeah, it's all you,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it was a great move coming to Grand Forks. It was a great choice for me. I got back into the swing of things, and here I am, at this recent event at the Empire. I felt so welcomed. I feel today, I feel so welcomed in Grand Forks. I feel like there's a community of harm reduction people and doctors and city officials and people with grant money that is coming from the governor and the mayor and academics and stuff like that. Everybody's pulling together to support us and me. I feel so welcome here. I feel so like the stigma, like we're making a difference, and the stigma is sort of turning a little bit, and we're moving in the right direction, and I love it. I feel so good about it.
And I kind of want to build on that a little bit. I feel like with the stigma breaking down as we're getting older, and as Grand Forks is getting older, I guess. As the stigma breaks down, I feel like actual discussions occur, and that's where actual legitimate solutions to social problems or anything come out of that.
Yeah, for sure. But before I moved up here, there wasn't like you. Okay, so you mentioned in your interview that there was the last psychedelic club member was essentially booed off stage, or he was poorly received with his idea of the substance testing kits, and we're breaking down that stigma. We're all working together, and people are considering it and working together to break down that stigma. And now our club, the Psychedelic Club, and the Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and all of us, we've all been invited to speak and participate in community affairs. And I love it.
And that would be how you show stigma, an effort to reduce it, right? What else could the city do to show an effort to reduce stigma? Would you say they've done a decent amount?
Sure, that's so you mentioned a great project that Michael Dulitz is, mulling over, the idea of the rehabilitation house on campus, and that points there again to the reduction of stigma. And that is why reducing stigma is so important, because then we can open up a conversation and we can get a rehabilitation house on campus. And what's the benefit of that? You get people who would otherwise be, using drugs and consuming alcohol excessively, essentially not doing very well, not contributing to society. And in fact, in my case, I was a drag on society. I was sucking out of society when I was using drugs, So you get this you decrease stigma, you get the rehabilitation house on campus, you get people back in school, get educated, they get professional degrees, they get careers, and they give back to society. It's a great line of, it propagates itself, when you just decrease the stigma, and then this just cascade of positive events unfolds. And that's why I'm so happy to be here in Grand Forks and partaking in the great task of stigma reduction and harm reduction passing on. Yeah.
Oh, something I we'll have to do with you again quick, and maybe you can try to do now. Is everybody, I had them say at one point, my name is blank. I am from Grand Forks, or I lived in Grand Forks. And then maybe another kind of para-summarizing phrase to sort of sum up what your stigma story was about.
Okay. So my name is Cal Datz. I was born in Philadelphia. I lived in New York, Montana, moved to Bismarck. Bismarck is where I started getting in trouble. I got sent to a boarding school in Georgia. I lived some time in Georgia and moved back to Bismarck, and now I'm here in Grand Forks. I'm a psychology major with a semester left, and I a minor in chemical dependency, and I am excited and honored to be here.
Nice, dude.
Thank you for listening, everybody. This has been your weekly harm reduction report. You can always find us on keqqradio.com, on the UND Psychedelic Club Facebook page, and on sandbaggernews.org at the Sandbagger News YouTube channel. We are really interested in talking to people, especially about stigma, but about anything else, so please contact us. An update on some things. Cal and I are going to Baltimore soon for the Students for Sensible Drug Policy Conference, and I'll be speaking about confidential informants and with Lance Block, who is the lawyer of Andrew Sadek's mother. Lance Block wrote Andrew's Law, which was amended and then it was changed, and it was passed in North Dakota last year. Andrew's Law, which is a step in creating better confidential informant policing policies. We'll be in Baltimore talking about that. I'm just excited because it's finally happening. In other news, the city of Grand Forks is getting a background check done on me so that I can volunteer when I'm in Minneapolis next week on my own time. Volunteer with the Minnesota AIDS Project on their syringe service exchange program. I'll shadow with them and learn some things, bring it back to us. So I'm really excited about that. This has been the Harm Reduction Report. Thank you so much. Sandbag on.